This is the Hardy Cascapedia. It is a classic, made in England disc drag reel that's designed for salmon fishing. And today, I'm here to review it. If you're a fan of classic fly reels, there's no doubt that you've already heard of the Hardy Cascapedia. Cascapedia was originally introduced in the 1930s to compete with the Edward von Hoff fly reels that were really popular amongst US salmon fishermen. And the Cascapedia is also one of Hardy's first ever drag fly reels. The original Perfect is of course a click pawl reel, and that came out several, let's even say many years before this Cascapedia. But with those hard-fighting Atlantic salmon, sometimes it's just more convenient to have a drag, and so Hardy introduced the Cascapedia. It's named, of course, after the Cascapedia River in Quebec, which even to this day holds some of the largest Atlantic salmon on the planet. But now let's dive into this reel. Of course, right away, you're gonna notice its classic looks. And frankly, if you're interested in this reel, that's probably the biggest reason to buy it. You are getting a made in England, classic looking fly reel that has a drag. So where the Perfect is also made in England and classic looking, it doesn't have a drag. So if you're fishing for really large Atlantic salmon, having a drag is frankly a useful feature. Same thing goes for steelhead and Pacific salmon and virtually any other hard fighting fish. So this is just gonna give you that same look, but make it easier and frankly more practical to actually land. And so because the drag is really one of the key features, let's dive into it. And on this drag, you're gonna get not quite one full turn of drag. It really doesn't have a ton of adjustability. And at least while the reel is new, it's actually hard to even get all the way to that one turn. So I'm even gonna call it a 3/4 turn drag. That said, you do get a reasonable amount of drag strength once you crank it down as far as you can. But it's definitely not crazy, and I'd put it in sort of the 4 to 5 pound range, if I were to guess. Definitely not going to be breaking that 10 to 15 pound tippet that you're probably using if you're salmon fishing, which is a good thing. But it's also not going to stop really, really big fish, and it's really not designed for heavy saltwater use. Bottom line is, don't take this to the Seychelles. And of course, not being designed for saltwater use, the drag is also not sealed. And again, just to summarize, the bottom line with the drag here is that it exists and it works. It's not the best ever, but you do get that classic look with a drag. So let's talk about the spool. And the spool on this reel is, as you would expect, classic. And when I say classic, I mean it has a standard arbor and therefore doesn't pick up line very fast. We've got a max spool diameter of about 3.5 inches. We've got a fairly wide width of about 1.1 inches, depending on where you measure it. You'll notice there's a fair amount of curvature, and frankly, I'm not willing to go into or even attempt the math to figure out exactly what that's gonna be, but 1.1 feels like my sort of average, and it's gonna be a pretty good guess. Last but not least is gonna be the arbor size, which, as I mentioned, is tiny, and it comes in at roughly 0.6 inches. And that yields a retrieval rate of about 5.2 inches per turn, or 220 inches for that 100-foot fly line. The bottom line is the retrieval rate on this reel is quite slow. And you'll definitely want to make sure that you max out your backing so you can increase that retrieval rate. Of course, if you get deep into your backing, which can happen with some really big salmon, you're going to have a tough time with this Cascapedia. I do recommend a large arbor fly reel if you ever think you're going to get into a situation where you're deep into your backing. In terms of capacities, the Cascapedia is actually somewhat interesting. This reel says 8/9 on it. And you can definitely put an 8 or a 9 weight on there, but to fill it, you're then gonna have to use 500 yards of backing. In reality, this reel is more well suited for a sort of 5 to 550 grain spay line than it is a standard single hand 8/9. And unfortunately, it's just a little bit misleading on the packaging. I wish Hardy would say much more upfront that this is a spay-sized reel and it's designed for spay-sized lines. Nobody wants to carry around a giant, super heavy reel and dump a bunch of money into backing when they could just buy a smaller reel. Up next is the weight, and as I mentioned, the weight is heavy. This reel weighs in at 12.1 ounces, which is really heavy for an 8/9 reel. But as I said, it's not actually an 8/9 reel, it's really more of a 10, 11, 12 reel. And if you study the capacities really carefully, you could probably fit 300 yards of backing with your 11 weight if you wanted to take it tarpon fishing. While 12 ounces is still heavy amongst big game reels, it's not as crazy heavy as it would be for an 8 weight. That said, this reel will balance a spay rod reasonably well, and you probably shouldn't use it on your 8 or 9 weight single hand rod. This review is brought to you by Trident Travel, which is our new destination travel service where you'll get our expert advice, planning, and guidance at no additional cost. That means no credit card fees, no booking fees, and for a limited time, you'll even earn Trident rewards on your travel bookings. So with every trip you book, you'll be earning valuable points that you can use towards free tackle here at Trident. Recently, we've had some clients go on some absolutely fantastic trips like bone fishing in Belize, steelhead fishing in BC, and tarpon fishing in Belize. So if you're thinking about taking a fly fishing trip, Trident Travel is the way to do it. We've got a ton of great destinations, excellent service, and even more destinations being added every month. Check us out at tridentflyfishing.com/travel. Up next is the sound, and this Hardy Cascapedia sounds great. It's got sort of a muted, slightly muted incoming, and a really nice loud outgoing. Let's take a listen. And while I wouldn't put this in the same league as Hardy Perfect, it's definitely one of the better sounding fly reels out there and exactly what you'd expect from a classic Hardy. And next up is the Ergonomics. And the ergonomics on this reel, especially if you consider the classic nature of it, are fine. I would absolutely not recommend changing the spool under any circumstance. It's hard to get back together, there's lots of small parts. Just don't do it. It's got a handle here that is reasonable. It doesn't have any flanges or any sort of modern ergonomic features, but this reel is about drip, not performance. And so we've got a classic looking handle, but it works. Same thing on the drag knob. It is a very functional drag knob, but if you're looking for a Sage Thermo type grip, this doesn't have it. And it comes in at $850, which is really a lot for a reel that doesn't offer that much in terms of performance. But let's face it, you've just spent $10,000 on your Atlantic salmon trip, and frankly, it's a drop in the bucket compared to that. Overall, I think the Cascapedia does exactly what it's intended to do. It is a heritage reel that provides some level of performance. And while there are imitators out there, and frankly, depending on where and when you look, sometimes many imitators, this one, in my opinion, offers the best combination of being true to its roots and still giving you a little bit of performance. And of course, if you've got questions about this Hardy Cascapedia or any classic Hardy fly reel, we've got answers. Give us a call at 888-413-5211 or email us 24/7 at support@tridentflyfishing.com. And don't forget, if you want to know more about classic fly reels, hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps us out, and you'll get up-to-the-minute updates whenever we release a brand new reel review. I'm Ben. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.